For Oasis Audio, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Who hasn't felt the loss of a loved one, and who hasn't reached for the phone to call a friend or parent or child, only to remember that they can no longer be reached that way? And what if we never got to say goodbye? Or what of those people who shaped us and taught us, but whom we never met? Or people now gone whose lives influenced us for eternity, and we'd like to say thanks. Well, who better to help us say what we'd like to say than Calvin Miller, whose new book is titled Letters to Heaven, Reaching Beyond the Great Divide, now available from Worthy Publishing in print as well as an audiobook from Oasis Audio. Calvin, thank you for joining me in this conversation.
Thank you, Wayne. Glad to be a part of it.
I wouldn't normally begin in such a personal way, but just as I got a copy of your book, I've been spending hour after hour at the bedside of a friend, someone who's been a spiritual father and a friend to me for more than 30 years. And in his weakness, we've had some wonderful, although short talks and times of prayer, but I know there will be some things left to be said once he's gone. Is this the kind of thing that got you thinking about Letters to Heaven?
Yeah, it really is. As a matter of fact, I can almost think of nobody who was very close to me that has gone on to be with the Lord that I wish I hadn't said something more to. You know, it just amazes me that as well as I knew them, suddenly something will occur that I forgot to share with them before they went on. And I wish I could absolutely not do that I had found a way. But since I couldn't, I'm mailing all these letters to heaven, hoping that the post office service in heaven is at least as good as it is down here.
I hope it's a whole lot better, actually.
Me too.
Well, just talk to me a little bit about heaven before we talk about the letters. I mean, it's something we all think about, don't we?
Yes, we all think about it, Wayne, and I think even more than thinking about it, most of us have conjured up in our mind a sort of picture of what we think it will be like. My suspicion is that it will be a realm so utterly different from our own that we could never, ever have guessed really what it is like. I think that I always quote that passage from Isaiah that says, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are his ways higher than our ways and his thoughts than our thoughts. And one of the things that I say in the introduction of the book is that so often when I pick up one of these books on heaven written by even famous theologians, I always feel like they're pictures taken with a very bad camera and that their pictures don't match mine. And so I've written a book here that leaves the actual nature of it to heaven, and I talk about heaven not in terms of metaphors like golden gates and streets of gold or gates of pearl. I don't talk about it that way. I talk more about it in terms of relationship. Mm-hmm. There's one supreme reason anybody should want to go to heaven, and that is to see Jesus. And then the second reason are these 40 letters here. People we knew and loved who loved Jesus and who were counting on the fact that our own affection with Jesus will line up all of those other relationships when we get there.
It's a great hope, isn't it?
It is a great hope. I think when anybody, especially at my age, I'm 75, when I think about the people who have meant the most to me, the reason I want to go to heaven, I want to see Christ, but I want to see those people too who have meant so much to me and whom I haven't finished a conversation with yet.
I heard you say once that Jesus did not promise us life after death. He promised us life instead of death.
That's what I believe with all my heart. I believe that little bridge at the moment that some try to capture or maybe do capture in near-death experiences where there's lights at the end of a tunnel and then suddenly there's the glory of God somehow, that those are pictures. But that sort of transitioning, I think, is even more complex. I guess I kind of see it as Jesus laid it out, that we close our eyes sometimes on a world of pain and a world of rejection, a world of need, and we open them the very next instant without going through tunnels necessarily. I don't object to people who have near-death experiences, but I don't think it's even that complex. I think we close our eyes in one world and we're in the next.
Mm-hmm. In the twinkling of an eye.
There is no transitional dying thing, I think.
Paul said we see through a glass darkly.
Yeah, we did. That's exactly what the apostle said, and I really like that. One gets the feeling that when he says that, his next line is, and then face to face. We shut out all of this horrible mist that we thought was Earth and that was reality, and then we awake to new reality. I take a letter to C.S. Lewis in this book kind of seriously at this point, because I've always felt that when Lewis lost Joy and she died, he wrote A Grief Observed, and I wanted him to come across more victorious in that book than he did. Joy herself, by the way, came across, I think, as very victorious. But Lewis was crushed by her death and seems for the moment, and unfortunately is one of his last books, if not his last. And so he leaves us with kind of a bitter taste after all the beautiful things he said about Aslan and that land beyond the land and so forth. He wrote this one. So I'm trying to regain for a moment this idea that there's life instead of death. We just close our eyes in one world and we wake in the next.
Let me focus on that letter for a moment, because is that an example of a letter to someone whom you did not personally know, or did you know C.S. Lewis?
No, I did not know him. He died in 1963. In fact, he died the very same day that President Kennedy was assassinated. So his own death was eclipsed by the death of an American president, and I think people who had admired him and read him, as I had, much of his stuff by 1963, when he died, it was just so eclipsed by the president's death that people didn't really notice. But there are in the book only about 3 or 4 letters by people, or 2 people I did not know. But most everybody in the book I did know and meet in one way or another. Norman Peale, for instance, Farrah Fawcett Majors, her sister was a member of our church. And many of these notable people that I talk about, I did know.
So these are conversations of things that were left unsaid, that were incomplete in a way. Huh?
Yeah, I think so. I think they were incomplete. For instance, even in the case of Farrah Fawcett, I depend upon her last days or moments or interviews with the press, notably Barbara Walters, when she talked about her cancer and how she wanted to go into heaven full of faith, and having tried the experiences of pain, if her own pilgrimage through pain could mean something to someone else, it was a good way to leave the world. I like that about her. There's just certain people in the book that were good friends, or at least I met once, that have been inspirational to me.
Including a man who died next to you on an airplane. Did you know his name?
I never did. I don't think I ever did learn his name. To be quite honest, at the time when he was saying all this stuff, he sort of nettled me. It was a fearsome night. The storm was all about that little airplane. Scared the life out of me. I don't know how the pilot stood it. And there weren't very many people on it. It was a very small commuter plane. And when he actually died, I for almost instantly knew he had died. I wish later on I paid a little more attention to that. But at least I got the pilot's attention, and we got the plane on the ground, and an ambulance or maybe even a hearse met him there at the airport. I don't know. He was gone, though.
So in writing these letters to heaven, are you teaching us to have more of a sense of completion of our conversations on earth, or is there always going to be that divide?
Well, if we knew when our friends were going to go, or our loved ones, we'd pay a little more attention to the moment and the sentiment. I guess everybody wants their, quote, famous last words to be critically important. A lot of times it's just pass the potatoes and that's it. You're gone. But if we knew that ahead of time, we'd pay a little more attention. So I think what I do in the book is really kind of important. It's that lingering, unfinished thing.
Yeah.
That we'd like to finish up.
Are we sometimes hesitant to talk about it because we want to offer them hope if they're struggling at life's end?
Well, I think we do. And unfortunately, Wayne, I feel like a lot of times the best thing we have to offer are just kind of platitudes. I wish they weren't. How many times have we said, gosh, if I could do anything more for you, and we leave a hospital room and we can't, they're gone. Or we say things that are sort of expected. Well, in the economy of God, we might say, this is all going to make a lot of sense. I don't know how many times I've said things like that. I really meant them, but suddenly it didn't deal with the grit of what they were feeling. They were leaving a husband, or they were leaving a wife, or they were leaving a mother, or they were losing their child. And all I've got to do is say, well, God sees and knows. What does that mean? Well, I think we would be a little less platitudinous and a whole lot more perceptive.
Mm-hmm. How did you decide who to write letters to in this book, Calvin?
Well, I'm always afraid I will have missed someone, but I know I got the big ones. The ones that made an impression. This is how I decided it. I like when Georgia Gilson died, and I talk about her burning up in the fire, and how Pentecostal said, well, she didn't go to church and she'll be in a lot of fire. Well, to me, that was a terribly insensitive thing to say about a girl that I thought a lot of. I had to really be careful with that. I think the one thing when you're speaking about eternity, you need to be very, very gentle. God gets to make the decision on the basis of Christ who goes.
Yeah.
And we just don't know what that basis is a lot of times. They may have trusted Christ in a moment we never knew about. And I'd like to give them that benefit of the doubt. That would be one, Georgia Gilson. I think the one letter in there that really has always haunted me was a girl that came through our town in a truck, in a pickup, or in a big semi, in an iron lung. And I'll never forget her lying there. And everybody was talking about polio. We closed the swimming pool up at the park because kids couldn't go swimming anymore because it was such an epidemic that summer, polio,
Mm-hmm.
I never have forgotten her just lying there like a freak in a circus so we could walk by and see her blink her eyes and quail before the notion that we could be the next victim. And in a sense, though, I was never a Democrat. I appreciated FDR and his own battle with polio because I think he did more. I'll never forget that at school when we were asked to bring a dime, and later on his picture would be on a dime because the president was personally pushing how to control this epidemic. And later, in the fullness of time, God had it worked out, of course, that Salk would come along, Jonas Salk, or the people who were so good about figuring out how to stop it. But for a while, we didn't know. And that was a haunting moment for me as a child.
Are some of your closest friends on this list of letters?
Naturally they are. One of the old friends I had after I got to be old, we both retired. He was mayor of our city. And we just met every Saturday for coffee, and we talked. And he also had a heart attack, and I've had a heart attack. So I've sort of been at the gates, myself. And one of the things I loved going to the gates of death and not on through. The thing I loved the most about it is that I just feel great knowing that when I got there, I wasn't afraid. It was the oddest sensation.
That's a gift.
It's what Jesus gave me. I was just totally ready to go, but totally at peace. Even my thoughts about my wife, whom I would hate to leave, were peaceful thoughts. I think she'd make it fine, and I just was going to see Christ, and I found a great and immense pleasure in that.
Mm-hmm. Did you write these over a period of time, or did they sort of all come at once to you?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I probably did half of those in a prospectus to a publisher. The publisher rejected before Worthy picked it up and agreed to publish it, and even got excited about it.
Wait a minute. A publisher rejected Calvin Miller? I want to know. Sure I want to know more about this.
A lot.
I want to get to the heart of that story.
Well, it happens once in a while. In fact, it happens a lot. But once that happened, then I began to fill up the blank places with people, probably on the second tier of unfinished conversations. But half of them were done in the prospectus. So I suspect that would be the half that I was really craziest about.
Yeah.
That I love those people, and they'd be the first to appear.
When you write a book like this, when it's all said and done, do you think, I wish I'd said that, or I wish I'd gone back and fixed that, or are you ever finished?
Never. And the worst thing about a book is the best thing about a book. It's in print. But when it gets in print, the worst thing about it is if you could just have done it a little better, said it a little better, it would be so great.
Yeah.
And you have to kind of make peace with the unfinished thing. I also do some painting. And I always say that every artist sort of reckons with naked canvas, a white piece of canvas that you've never put a dab of color on, how intimidating it is. Then you begin that endless trek across the floor. You walk across, put a little paint on it, and back up and think about it, and walk across the floor and put some more paint on it, and you keep walking, tracing it 1,000,000 times, till finally you get this picture done, and you say to yourself, I can live with this, It's not that I can't do more. I can put more paint on this, but I've got to stop sometime, and I can live with this. And then I put my signature on it, only if I agree that I want this to be an evidence of myself. It's kind of like Ayn Rand said, art is man defining himself. A book is a man defining himself.
Mm-hmm.
And you lay that last swatch of color on it, and you give it to Worthy and their editors and say, please don't mess this up. It's bad enough the way it is.
I don't know if you would call it dissatisfaction, but wouldn't it be boring if in the creative process if we were totally finished with something all the time?
Yeah, it would be. And of course, the worst fears you ought to have is when you finish something and you're really proud of it. You're just setting yourself up for a fall.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Well, going back to the heaven theme for just a moment here as we wrap up, how did your perception or your thinking about heaven, how did it change because of this exercise in writing these letters that you went through?
Well, for one thing, one of the things that really did change is I examined the metaphors all over again. I looked at what the Bible said in the scarce passages we have on it. God on the center of the throne, Jesus at the right hand, and so forth. I looked at the 24 elders and the beast. I looked at the great crowds crying hallelujah that so filled Handel's music in the Messiah. And I asked myself, how stable are those images, and are they the key things? I really believe the key things about heaven are the key things about earth. The thing we treasure on earth the most are the relationships. I rarely hear anybody decent die saying, boy, I sure had a lot of money when I died. They don't say that. They say, gosh, I hate to leave my wife. And I think those are the things that make heaven heaven. We get back with those we loved. And that's what the book's about. And by the way, I often say, too, that most of the books I read on heaven are sort of pasted together with our own ideologies about the subject. When I read the books that have come out on heaven, I read them and I think, they're talking about things that sort of we made up our mind about a long time ago. Here's what heaven's going to be like. I'm going to see Grandma again, or I'm there. It reminds me of so many of those old gospel songs we had back in the 50s and 60s. It's a mansion over the hilltop.
Yep.
It's a cabin in the corner of glory land. We put together very earthly metaphors to define something that is so much above us.
We limit ourselves, don't we?
We limit ourselves, and we limit our view of heaven. I think it's going to be so magnificent, but I think we have no idea what it's really going to be like. We trust that to Jesus, whom we hope to see there, and he will be the key thing. Golden streets don't matter. In a street where every street is gold, only Jesus matters.
Amen. Well, before I leave you, what are you writing? What are you painting now?
Well, I always paint a little bit. I would like to have a little more time. It seems like they don't go very well together. When I get in the middle of promoting a book like this, I don't paint very much. And when I get in the middle of a real good picture, I don't write very much. I have two segregated lives that I'm constantly trying to put together. But yeah, I'm always working a little bit on that stuff. But I'm hoping to write a book on evangelicalism and to take a look at why it is apparently dying. I have a book at publishers now. I don't know whether they will say thumbs up or thumbs down, but I really worked to read as much as I could to take a look at why the church is having a hard time surviving and growing in America. Not true in the global South, not of Africa, South America. They're doing real well with the church, but we're not. In spite of the mega church movement, we're just losing members like crazy, and they aren't going back. Every year in America, we start 1,000 new churches. That's good. But every year in America, we close 4,000 churches. Well, this obviously can't go on very long until evangelicalism begins to look in America like it does in England or Sweden. We just have to ask ourselves, what are the causes and what can we do about them? That's sort of been on my mind. I have no idea if that'll work, Wayne. Pray for my ideas. I think they're important.
They are important. I was just going to say, I sure hope to read that. I'm not a publisher. I don't know how they make those decisions, but I sure hope to read that book someday. If they don't, I hope you'll send it to me anyway.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for calling. I really appreciate that.
It's always a delight to talk with you, Calvin. Thank you. Calvin Miller, the author of Letters to Heaven, Reaching Beyond the Great Divide, from Worthy, and now as an audiobook from Oasis Audio. For Oasis Audio, I'm Wayne Shepherd.